We'll be finishing up the digestion system physiology by looking at the function of the large intestine as well as the defecation reflex. Looking at the gross anatomy of the large intestine, recall that the terminal end of the small intestine is the ileum. So the ileum will enter into the cecum through the ileocecal valve, and so the cecum will be the first part of the large intestine. And notice that at the cecum we have the vermiform appendix, which is a pouch that extends from the cecum, roughly 2 to 3 inches long. And this is sometimes a structure that gets blocked, and the bacteria that's in that appendix structure can cause an inflammatory reaction and cause the appendix to become inflamed, known as appendicitis. The cecum will then enter into the ascending colon. Ascending colon turns into the transverse colon. Transverse colon continues into the descending colon. And then the descending colon will continue into the S-shaped sigmoid colon. Sigmoid colon empties into the rectum and then through the anal canal, and the internal and external anal sphincters will then open to the outside world. The longitudinal muscle that we see throughout the alimentary canal that normally encompasses the entire circumference of the tube now becomes just 3 bands of longitudinal muscle that are called the tenei coli, and the tone of these muscle bands will create a pouching of the large intestine. And each of these pouches are called haustrum. And as the fecal material moves through the large intestine, it fills an individual haustrum. As the stretch of the haustrum increases, it'll cause it to contract and force the fecal material into the next haustrum. So by these haustral contractions, the fecal material will be moved along through the large intestine towards the rectum. Recall also that as there is stuff in the stomach and as well in the duodenum, there are signals sent to the large intestine that will stimulate these peristaltic segmentation movements through the large intestine. Remember the gastrocolic reflex and the gastroileal reflex that will relax the ileocecal valve, so that will continue to move things through the tube. And as well, the hormone gastrin that is secreted in the stomach will also relax the ileocecal valve. So this all makes sense, because when there is stuff present in the stomach, it means that we want to keep things moving down the tube because more stuff is coming down the pipe. Looking at the basic functions of the large intestine, its major function will be the movement, propulsion of the fecal material toward the anus so that we can remove it from the body. As well, there's a very healthy population of bacteria within the large intestine. We have many different species of bacteria that live in the large intestine normally. And they will use as a food source some of the material, the fecal material that passes from the small intestine, the carbohydrates and some proteins that aren't broken down, and they will use those as a food source. And so some of the products that will result from that, we'll see, will create some gases that will contribute to the flatus or the flatulence that we experience. And as well, some of the byproducts, we'll see these bacteria will make vitamins that we can also reabsorb out of the large intestine and be used by our body. Some water is also reclaimed in the large intestine. Approximately 10% of the water that is reabsorbed out of the tube occurs in the large intestine. The vast majority of water, approximately 90%, is reclaimed in the small intestine. And even though the large intestine is essential for comfort, it is not essential for life. If there is a pathology affecting the large intestine, inflammatory disorders or cancer, the large intestine can be removed to a significant degree, and instead an opening provided to the outside world through the abdominal wall, and the fecal material then would be collected in a stoma bag. So it's not essential for life that we have a functioning large intestine, but obviously essential for comfort. Looking at the bacterial flora that inhabit the large intestine, these bacteria can arrive there through the stomach and through the small intestine. If they survive that path, some bacteria are able to survive that very harsh acidic environment and continue on down the tube. Also, the anus, because it's open to the outside world, provides another avenue by which bacteria can enter the large intestine. So these bacteria will colonize the colon, and they can ferment the indigestible carbohydrates that will enter into the large intestine. So remember that cellulose is a plant fiber that we can't break down. And so that will be in the large intestine, and these bacteria can use these carbohydrates as a food source. And then their byproducts of digesting these carbohydrates will be releasing these irritating acids and gases such as methane and carbon dioxide that contributes to the flatus or the flatulence. They also will synthesize some B complex vitamins and as well vitamin K. And remember that vitamin K is necessary for the liver to be able to make clotting factors so that when we are bleeding, we're able to clot and not continue to bleed. And we have to have sufficient vitamin K in our body to be able to do this. So there are times when people are on antibiotics, for example, if they're taking broad spectrum antibiotics for an issue in their body, and these antibiotics will end up destroying as well a lot of the normal bacterial flora that's in our large intestine. And there's a possibility, if this is happening to a large degree, that we're not making enough vitamin K. The body's not absorbing enough vitamin K out of the large intestine, and it can lead to bleeding disorders. So that's one of the symptoms that you may see if a large population of the bacterial flora is destroyed due to bacterial or antibiotic use. Again, motility in the large intestine occurs through the haustral contractions. So as the individual haustra fill, the stretch that causes on the wall of the large intestine will cause it to contract, and so that will keep moving the fecal material forward. There will be a signal that happens as well that known as the gastrocolic reflex. So when there's food in the stomach, this gastro or stomach colon reflex will increase the peristaltic action that's in the large intestine to continue to move contents towards the rectum. So ideally you want to be moving the material in the large intestine to the rectum and defecating 3 to 4 times a day. That would be the ideal situation. So every time you eat, that gastrocolic reflex should be initiating increased peristalsis, and it can initiate what's it's called a mass movement, so that it's a very large movement that continues to push stuff basically from the mid transverse colon area and very quickly move it through the descending colon, sigmoid colon into the rectum to initiate the defecation reflex. This slide then will illustrate the gastrocolic reflex. So it's showing you that you have the presence of food in the stomach and presence of chyme in the duodenum. So these areas, these structures within the alimentary canal will then send signals to the large intestine to stimulate the increased peristaltic or mass movements of the fecal material through the colon and towards the rectum. And we'll see then that once the feces enters into the rectum, that the stretch of the rectal walls will stimulate the defecation reflex. And remember also that parasympathetic activity generally in the body, when the parasympathetic arm of the autonomic nervous system is active, it's going to increase peristaltic action throughout the gastrointestinal tract and increase the movement of fecal material and stimulate the defecation reflex. This slide will illustrate the defecation reflex. So as fecal material enters into the sigmoid colon and then into the rectum, there are stretch receptors in the wall of the rectum. So as the rectum becomes distended with the fecal material, these stretch receptors will fire and send that information to the central nervous system. And as a result, there will be a reflex that the internal anal sphincter, which is composed of smooth muscle, will relax. So because this is smooth muscle as the target, smooth muscle is the target of the autonomic nervous system, which is the automatic nervous system, which means you have no control over that reflex. So once there's a stretch in the rectum, these stretch receptors will result in the relaxation of that smooth muscle that makes up the internal anal sphincter. So this will also send information to your cerebral cortex, which is where your conscious control of actions in the body occurs in your brain. So you're aware now that there is this feeling of distension and that you have this urge. So now you have a conscious control over the external anal sphincter, so you can decide when you want to relax the external anal sphincter to be able to defecate. And so the external anal sphincter is made up of skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscle is voluntary muscle in your body. You have control over skeletal muscle. So that's the component of the defecation reflex that you have conscious control over. So this is, you'll get asked this for sure. The internal anal sphincter is the involuntary smooth muscle sphincter. You have no control over that. And the external anal sphincter is the voluntary skeletal muscle sphincter. You have conscious control, hopefully, over that sphincter.